We all have a story to tell. Let's tell yours. Welcome to the Intellectual People Podcast with your host, Jason. Come together and listen to journey stories and more from interesting people. Welcome your host, Jason.
Welcome to the Intellectual People Podcast. I often post on forums, and I'd like to personally thank those forum owners for allowing me to post on those forums. In no particular order, they are audiosciencereview.com, audiocircle.com, audioshark.org, audiofilestyle.com, AV Nirvana, which is also the home of Roomy Q Wizard and AudioLens, DIYaudio.com, gears.com, and Parts Express Forum. Thank you so much and enjoy. Today on the Intellectual People Podcast, I have Dave Smith of Factory 5. How are you doing today, Dave?
Doing just great. So just did a Facebook Live, so this is number 2.
Excellent. Dave, have you always been into cars?
Yeah, I mean, when you're a kid, you're into go-karts, that go down a hill with coasting. But yeah, I mean, it was my older brother and I were fixing cars, working on cars. I mean, the previous generations don't know this, or the current generations don't work on anything. You can't fix anything these days. So we fixed everything when we were kids. So yeah.
So what is Factory 5 actually?
Well, it was a mission statement. Do you ever see Jerry Maguire?
I have.
It was a bad idea. My brother and I had 3 business plans back in 1994, and this was the least financially solvent business plan, but the most fun. And we decided to do it. And really, that's the truth. The other 2 were related to .com companies. If you knew what happened in 94 to 2000, anyone with a .com address got about $10 to $20 million in startup money. So we picked the wrong horse, but the most fun over the years, it turns out.
How old were you when you first were involved in cars?
Well, I remember when we were kids in Michigan, small town Michigan, my father would take us to Whiskey Ridge Circle Track. If you think about racing, most people's experience with racing is circle track, because back in the day and even today, you can't go 50 miles from any small town in the United States without a circle track. And, a periodontist dream for most of those tracks, but a lot of learning. I mean, you'd be surprised how many really talented, brilliant mechanics, engineers, drivers are in small town America at circle track. And a lot of NASCAR drivers go under pseudonyms and run because that's some of the best competition. So that was 3rd grade. My brother and I grew up in Puerto Rico, and we built go-karts and ran them down the street right at the base of a highway. That wasn't real smart. But yeah, since an early age really is the answer.
And all the way through high school, I would presume, right? Really heavily at that point involved in automotive?
Yeah, almost all of us of my age started with the only default car, which was what car in between 65 and 77 was worth less than $50, and they were ubiquitous on every corner, a VW Bug, right?
Right.
And then came the obligatory JC Whitney catalog. And
That's right.
Yeah, so I had a VW Bug. My brother had one. I was really kind of more into motorcycles and dirt bikes and riding. I think it's more 3-dimensional. You get on a bike and you can feel the shocks on your hands, the brakes and all that. But we were both into cars and bikes at a young age, and it was a passion of ours, like a lot of kids are from our generation.
Are you formally educated at college?
I graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree, and I have 2 very useful degrees, philosophy major and zoology. So I really was very serious about going to medical school. And when I graduated, I worked for 2 years at Boston University Medical School, and that's what introduced me to CAD, and that was the foundations of the company.
And when you say CAD, computer-aided design, correct?
Right, computer-aided design and CNC, computer number controls. Basically, remember your old Cartesian coordinates, X and Y? And
Absolutely.
Then go 3-dimensional on that. And so now we've got 6-axis robotics here, but everything started with version 2.1 AutoCAD, if you remember, back in the Wayback Machine.
Absolutely.
Floppy disks and all,
Yep. So how did you transition from medical to automotive? What was the defining moment?
Well, I think both, and remember, my brother and I both started this company.
Yep.
And my brother had a really crazy idea of using 5.0 Mustang running gear. He had a 5.0 Mustang. I had an IROC. I did not have a mullet. but I had a 5.7 liter TPI 87 IROC, great car. And so, the Factory 5 was kind of the hobby, the business idea. My brother was a chemist at Avery Dennison, and I was working at Butte Medical School, and that led to a job offer for a pharmaceutical company and a career that I started off in quality control. And I figured, that's a good career, but anyone who's worked for a big company knows that, when you get to be our age in your 50s is when you're kind of got a target on your back because you're making a lot of money. And then comes a young guy like me, 26, and I get all the promotions because I'm working 12 hours a day. But Boston University taught me AutoCAD, and we were doing reconstruction of motor neurons in the spinal column of a monkey, an African green monkey, and it was NIH funded grant for an aging study, and it was fascinating. But I remember talking to my brother saying, this CAD, which was architectural software at the time, we could do a 3D chassis, and he was interested in doing a Cobra. So that kind of were the elements of the business plan. And so he cobbled the first car together. And later, as we made some money, we were quick to buy that car back and destroy it. We didn't want anybody to see it. But the early days were kind of, a business plan that was really a hobby that turned into a business that at some point, Mark and I had to decide, do you want to do this full time? And we quit our jobs. And I walked away from a pile of stock options out west. I was working for a biomedical company in Southern California, and I was director of operations at the time. So 28, 30 years old now, you have to pick your path. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could do something I love? It's not an original thought, but I took that CAD, and I don't want to bore your listeners, but CAD in 1995 was the exclusive domain of Boeing, of military, aerospace. Even some of the biopharm companies, we use our mold making OrCAD and stuff on our molds. But that was really high margin medical and aerospace and military. I knew that technology would filter down, and it did. But we were lucky to be in that spot because that kind of coalesced with the internet coming together. And so everything took off after that. And we founded our company on that technology. And we were pretty unique at the time. No one else would have thought to do it because it was too expensive.
Looking back, do you regret your decision at all?
Sometimes, they say,
Why?
Well, they say in racing that the windshield's a lot bigger than the rearview mirror for a reason. Look ahead. So I don't waste too much time on regrets. But I think, from a personal standpoint, the business cost me my friendship with my brother. He was the best man in my wedding. We grew up together, and the stress of the business. And once we started making money, we got 40 people that work here. We've shipped almost $300 million worth of product over 25 years. And the pressure to run a company and the pressure to have different ideas about what you want in a company, they don't teach classes about that. And so my regret is that if I looked back, maybe I would some days after a couple beers and I'm listening to the right, Aerosmith or Boston or Eagles, I might say, hey, maybe just go back and work for big companies and stay friends.
So your relationship with your brother is still tarnished because of Factory 5?
Yeah, I think we went our separate ways. I think I bought him out about 10 years ago, and that was really difficult. As an entrepreneur, you spend all your time at risk. And once you get that company up and running, the guy that gets it from 0 to 10 million is typically the wrong guy to take it from 10 million on, because you're risk averse. So that crazy risk taker all of a sudden becomes risk averse at the level of 10 million. So what you want out of life, out of the company, we had different visions, and they really are still different visions today. And neither one of us are right. They're just really incompatible. And I think that happens to a lot of stresses in a lot of startup businesses. But nowadays, it's not so bad. We're in speaking terms, so we see each other functions. But other than that, no regrets at all. I mean, it's been an incredible ride. And on the positive side, I've got 99 positives for one negative. That was just a tough one to, when you lose your best friend,
Absolutely.
quite a price to pay. So
Absolutely. I know that this business was started in the early 90s, and take me back to the infancy of it after your first prototype that you cobbled together, as you say. How did it progress from there?
Well, I think a lot of startup businesses, especially kind of mom and pop style company like we had, you can have a professional business plan. You come to a point in time when the ideation and the fun conversations become serious, and you got to make a decision. Do you want to do it or you're not? And luckily, I had a wife who said, "Look, I'm going to take care of the kids. You do whatever you're going to do. Um, and when we were really out of money, she said, what are we going to do to pay our bills? And I looked around and I'm like, sell the couch, put it in the yard. We get $50 on the couch, right? We mortgaged our car, for the third time. We had unsecured debt. But in the early days, Mark and I talked about this, and Mark had done a really good job of building a prototype. It was a horrible car. And the business plan was just a plan. It needed, execution. And that's the other part of it. You have this dream and then you got to execute. So if I were to walk you back to the early days, you had two guys working in a 1,000 square foot rented garage for $500 a month. And I had AutoCAD drawings and part number drawings and all the elements of ISO 9000 and the lacking of a company that could integrate it. We started with the first car. We built a prototype. We took it SEC Autocross. We built a second car. We made it about 2 years living on our own money and funding ourselves. And then we started selling kits. Our first kit shipped in December of 1995. And my wife and I had moved out from Southern California so that we could all be in one spot, small little town in the middle of nowhere, New England, kind of a broken down old garage that had been abandoned and we rented. And we sold our first kit. A young man named Sean Kelly from Texas bought it. And I remember we had 5 bottles of champagne, and not many people know this. My brother and I had already come to loggerheads. I'm a quality control guy. I'm a systems guy. I'm an operations guy. And if you're going to sell something, you're going to sell it right, whether it's 1 or 1,000. And my brother was kind of creative genius, but, Thomas Edison, sleeping in the lab. So we had a fight one night, and I went out to a liquor store and I bought 5 bottles of champagne. And I put a marker, a Sharpie, and I wrote number 1, number 5, number 10, number 25, and number 100. And I remember writing the 100 thinking, this will never happen. And just this past Saturday, the guy that bought number 100 came by Factory 5. And, 25, 30 years later, we're both looking a little older, but we've done a lot of good and made a lot of difference in a lot of people's lives. And I'm proud of it. But yeah, that was the early days, small garage, Dartmouth, Massachusetts. And then that ramp up from 0 to 1 million to 10 million was extremely stressful. And we had a good idea, but yeah.
Why was it so stressful?
Every reason under the, I mean, you have to find suppliers, and you're a company with no suppliers, and you're selling a kit that's going to have 4,000 parts in it. So, people look at the company, they think it's a car company. If you scratch under the surface, it's a parts and engineering company. And how we get those parts in-house, how we fulfill them, how we pack them, how we make sure they're the right parts. I mean, think about it. One of those parts are off and you can hurt someone, right? So and then hiring people. You read every business startup manual in the world and it says your people are everything. And our people are treasures here. We've got such a great staff. It wasn't always that way. And learning how to hire the right people, they teach classes on it, but unless you go through it, it's really hard to really learn it truly.
Tell us how you have decided to hire people. What is your magic?
It's interesting because if I see a resume that says Eagle Scout on it, I will interview that person. My experience, and I'm sure everybody has different ones, is if a kid has an Eagle Scout, if he's able to accomplish that at a young age, by the way, the guy who's in charge of engineering, Jesper, Eagle Scout, he's been with me for 25 years. Oh, who's in charge of new product design? All these sketches on the wall here, all the new product development specifications, all of those things come from Jim, Eagle Scout, Rensselaer Polytech, top of his class, smart kid. So, my father used to give me great advice, don't kick your own ass and surround yourself with great people. And guess what? Surrounding yourself with great people is a function of finding them. How do I find them? Eagle Scout on the resume. I bring the person in, I ask them questions about what's your favorite cars? Give me your top 3, top 10 cars. And if a kid can't answer that question, he's got no business being here. This is a car business, So, and you'd be surprised some of the answers. I asked kid, well, tell me about your first car. One kid couldn't remember his first car. And I'm like, well, he's in the wrong spot here. So look at background. Past performance is the best indicator of future performance. That's a standard in job search. I also like to hire, and I'm not age discriminatory. I'll hire anybody. I mean, look at me, I'm 57. Now, I got to hire old guys too. But a kid right out of college or someone without experience, it's a double-edged sword when it comes to hiring. You get them so you can train them in your philosophy. Our company philosophy is a core philosophy, very different from most companies. And my brother and I were very different about that ethos. And philosophy, remember I studied in college, is central to everything. So when you hire somebody fresh out of school or someone young without experience or without a lot of experience, they're not contaminated with bad ideas. and you can build in them your own company ethos and your ideas. The downside, the double-edged sword of that is sometimes people think the grass is always green on the other side of the hill, and they don't have anything to compare it to. So when they leave, they realize, oh my God, Factory 5 is a great company. Can I come back? And I try not to hire people back. But yeah, so hiring the right people, huge difference in the company.
Do you have a high turnover rate?
We really don't. The last year, we've actually lost some of our best guys. I've had some partner companies that have fished in our pond, and I don't like that at all. It's a violation of the kind of the unwritten code of partnerships. But what's happened is the aftermarket parts business, when COVID hit, everyone's at home and they need projects. So aftermarket automotive parts segment has exploded. And so people are rapidly scrambling to find the best people to help ramp up their companies, their production. And so there's been quite a push, but historically, very little turnover. I mean, I just mentioned Jesper and Jim, 25-year veterans.
25 years. How many people make up Factory 5 today?
Right now we got 42. 39 of them are full-time. We got some part-time guys.
Is Jasper responsible for the next iteration, if you will, of the current chassis?
That's a good question, because manufacturing engineering and evolutionary development of a platform is a little different than new product development. That's an all new car, all new ideation. You know, Jim and Jesper are two brilliant engineers and very senior, very experienced. They know everybody in the automotive industry. They know kind of our development style. Jim's an expert at value engineering. So I give Jim design specifications, what I want out of a new model, new car, new product. And then he goes back in his lab and mixes them up. Jesper, from the mechanical engineering standpoint, takes those not crude prototypes, fairly well refined prototypes like an alpha car before a beta production that is kind of compliant to specification, but tooling's not built yet. It's not integrated yet. So he does really the engineering, the hard engineering and the heavy lifting to get it into manufacturing engineering, to get it into manufacturing. Whereas Jim kind of does the first 2/3, the first third of the product development.
So Jim is more along the lines that's taking your concept, or is it a group of people's concept?
That's a great, I'd like to claim all the credit, but no, I mean, I'm the least smart guy in the room. And that one of the things I've succeeded is hiring smart guys. So we'll talk about, here's a good example. We have a new product that's coming out. And I mentioned here's my financial background. I'll say, hey guys, we've got 8 models, now 9 models with derivatives of platforms, and they're all build-it-yourself 2-seater sports cars. Can I possibly have a blue spot, something different, right? Says Steve Martin. Right. So I want a 4-passenger. We bought George Long's old company, Rat's Glass. He had a 4-passenger Vicky and some very, kind of Riddler award-winning hot rods, but 4-passenger, right? So I'll say to Jim, I need a 4-passenger. I need a truck-based product. Maybe we can look at Automotive. Maybe we can look at ultralights. Maybe we can look at other segments where we can leverage our skills in chassis design, development, CNC, manufacturing, and molding. Those are our core skills. And then put it into the Factory 5 formula. So it doesn't have to be a car. It most likely would be automotive related. We've done a lot of aftermarket parts. We're selling engine packages through a related company. So yeah, Jim will take those specifications, but more often than not, it's a collaborative effort. And some of the ideas come from manufacturing, the guys on the shop floor, the welders. I got a lot of guys in my parking lot that are driving trucks. Maybe I should do a truck product. So yeah.
So it's safe to say then, Jim makes the prototype of the concept. Jasper then makes it actual product, and Jim figures out, along with the group, how to make it a manufacturable product, because that is very, very different than a concept, right?
Totally. And so, but their jobs really do kind of work like
overlap.
They're really not, throw it over the wall. Here's my idea, my creation. You make it into reality, because Jim understands manufacturing engineering, and they're both using SolidWorks software. They understand CAD capabilities. They understand what our core skill sets are. They understand the supplier side. So 25 years in business, these guys really work well together. So I would say all of Factory 5's products come from 2 guys, Jesper and Jim. I'd like to tell you there are some cars that, and this is actually one of my brother's beliefs. If a product doesn't have a champion, and it came from one of his ex-bosses, it'll fail. Someone in the company has to be on fire, rabid, I love it, for this product to succeed. And the new one that we're doing, Jim is nuts about it. He's crazy. So he's putting his heart and soul into it, and that's all the difference.
And is that new product what you're calling the FR9?
No, actually, and it's FR9 is the engine that Roush sells. That's the cup motor, for NASCAR. We're running the F9R, so it's the acronym. By the way, why do we call the company Factory 5 Racing and not ACT or some acronym? Because a trademark book I read said avoid acronyms for this reason. So the F9, it's our 9th design, Factory 5's 9th design, and obviously racing is in everything that we do. But the F9R is a really cool car. I needed to leverage the chassis components of the Daytona Coupe, but I asked Jim to come out with a Halo car. Basically, not a supercar, but a hypercar. And if you look at hypercars today, the horsepower wars, 1,000+ horsepower, traction control, electronics, what can we do in that segment? Our GTM was kind of getting long in the tooth, so we need a new car. So Jim actually partnered up with the guy who designed the Celine S7. And the effort to produce that car was kind of a collaborative between the two of them. And I think Jim and Phil Frank is the guy's name. Jim and Phil, kind of had the same, butting heads on a design side. But yeah, so the F9 is our next super. It will debut at SEMA in 2021. This year in November, it'll be a driving, running 9.5-liter V12 powered monster, and it's beautiful. The body shape is. Let's just do this. This is kind of fun. Here's your F9 right here. Here's I can't turn it. There it is. Yeah, that's the F9, and those are all the concept sketches. And obviously, there's design specifications that go a mile long, because you've got car systems, everything from suspension and driveline and interior DBA, power steering, whatever you got going into it has to be considered. But Jim will do that, and that is our next vehicle. Jim's now also working on a top secret project that is not a car, put it that way, and it'll be a real departure for us, and that also will debut at SEMA.
And that will be sold through factory5.com?
Yes.
Walk me through the actual chassis design process in terms of pickup points. And for those that don't understand, that might not understand what I'm referring to, please explain. How do you come up with those chassis pickup points? Because that is a very critical part of chassis design, as well as suspension geometry. Well,
those are the two biggest. And if you think about it, we'll start from the easiest one that's not negotiable. We're not going to engineer powertrains, right? So we're going to pick up powertrains from Ford, from GM, from Chrysler. We've got a Speedstar car in the showroom that uses a Hemi 392, modern, Dodge Hemi motor. But let's say we're using the Ford Coyote motor. The nice thing about being members of SEMA, we're senior members of SEMA. We've been there for a long time. I'm on a steering committee for the Low Volume Act, work heavily with SEMA. They will, manufacturers share their drawings now. Everything is so integrated that Ford, I can get the drawings for the driveline, transmission, the engine, the headers, exhaust, and everything for that 5-liter Coyote or the 5.2-liter Illuminator, right? So Jim and Jesper are going to start with, and other engineers who help them are going to start with those pickup points of engine mounts. But remember, once that engine's in a certain spot, there's a lot of variability. You have headers, and where are the headers going to route, and where are the oxygen sensors for the O2 sensors going to go? Where is the exhaust going to go? Out the side, out the back? There's real estate management that has to be done. But pickup points in terms of hard points, engine mounts, transmission mounts. Now, where it gets a little fudgy is suspension. We've got wheelbase, track, and dimensions of a chassis. Are we going to do our own suspension? And we've gotten more and more into our own suspension geometry. In the early days, we used factory OEM suspension geometry. We didn't trust ourselves, right? Now we've gotten so much track experience that upper and lower control arms, coilover shocks, tie rod ends that steer the car, rear control arms. If it's an IRS car, upper and lower rear control arms, shock absorbers. I mean, just the mounting point of a shock absorber in terms of its stroke and where it's mounted and its leverage is hugely complex. You've got, two radiuses and an ellipse on a front suspension, upper and lower control arms, and a steering rack that's moving. So you have a thing that's going through its arc that's moving and a thing that's going through its arc that's fixed. Making those lines intersect are what Jim and Jesper are so good at. So those are the things that in a chassis fixture have to be completely perfect. If they're wrong, the rest of the house is not going to go together well.
Great. Do you do any K&C testing, and that acronym is kinematic and compliance testing?
Well, one of the miracles of CAD and we've mirrored that. We have taken a fixture, like, let's say we're going to measure torsional rigidity of the chassis. Jim
Mhm.
has a physical fixture that'll measure how much force to generate 2 degrees of deflection on the front suspension. And it's
Yep.
an I-beam, it's an I-beam with a bunch of weight on it, right?
Sure.
And it's a simple little leveler that says when it's 2 degrees. You match that up to the CAD. If you look at SolidWorks software right now, the software we use is so sophisticated. It comes within 5, 6, 10 pounds on a 17,000 pound frame. The measured tolerance has more variability than what's on the actual computer. So in terms of torsional rigidity, functional testing, there's some things like we're trying to do that we haven't been very successful at. And it's surfacing is, here's a cool image here. Here's our scale model of our
Yep.
F9, right?
Sure.
Getting here. And doing this scale model of the car is great, but surfacing that on the computer and doing flow analysis, we haven't gotten the right, we still trust the wind tunnel. And maybe other companies are better at it, and maybe SolidWorks isn't the best software program for flow. I know Rhino does a much better job. Phil uses Rhino on surfacing. But for us, there's nothing like real world testing in the wind tunnel. But we have done finite element analysis and structural testing on the chassis. It's kind of our forte.
Great. And when you talk about the wind tunnel, are you talking about Aerodyne down in Mooresville, North Carolina?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been down there.
And you use tunnel number 2 or tunnel number 1, 2 being the slower one?
I don't know. I wrote the checks and the guys went down there. I've never been there. I've only seen
Good for you. You should go down.
What is it, 85 mile an hour?
Yeah, about 90 miles an hour for the small tunnel. Yep.
That's what we're using then. Yeah. But
Okay.
It's we're running the car in it. And
Sure.
Actually, and it's a real great shout out for those guys, because talk about expertise. Every time we've been there, the guys have run it, and they've run so many cars that they look at like, oh, that's not going to work. That's maybe I'd cover that up. Really, on the old Daytona Coupe, Type 65 Coupe, the reason why it won the world championship, the FIA championship, was aerodynamics, right? It was the same Cobra with a slippery body, so they could run the higher speeds. Well, if you know the history of the Cobra, aero was so important to it. Peter Brock was an aerodynamicist. Back then, they didn't have horsepower, so drag really mattered. Nowadays, we got all the horsepower in the world. We just put wings on it, have downforce. We don't care about drag. We got plenty of horsepower. But that Daytona Coupe, when we put it in the wind tunnel, we were in a battle between authenticity and wind airflow, because where the radiator opening is, the guys down there were like, if you could just smooth out that radiator opening and get rid of that sharp edge, you'd get 10% better downforce. But we couldn't, because that was how the original car was made. So there's this balance in the replicas of functionality and modern design and performance. And we always have to balance that. But great, the guys down there, great shout out for them.
I do. How much downforce does your prototype make?
Well, the F9, we actually, bad news here, turn off the computers. We got lift. We got a tremendous amount of lift on the first prototype nose. And to credit my point, when the guys got the car in the tunnel, the manager came out and goes, oh yeah, that doesn't look good. Just had a really large race nose. The guys are taking apart the F9 right now. I could take you down there and show it, but we redesigned the nose, and based on the computer modeling, we should get the downforce we need. But we're looking for like 150 mile an hour, maybe 800 to 1,000 pounds of downforce, balanced front to rear. Safe, not Formula One, right?
Right.
Right. Something that'll help definitely on a road course. My Daytona Coupe downstairs has a real large rear wing, front canards, and a front splitter, and a rear diffuser, and it generates great downforce to the point where I can run on a track, and it's hard for me to drive an old Cobra or one of our spec racers on track, because you get spoiled with downforce real quick, and you can turn real hard with it. So yeah, but we've used the wind tunnel for that. I don't think, getting back to your question about the CAD, for us, where we are in sophistication, that's where we've kind of stumbled and where we are in development. Now, I'll bet you 5 years from now, we'll have flow analysis perfect on the computer, and we won't have to go, we'll verify in the tunnel, but we won't have to go there to do development.
It is definitely feasible. I can promise you that. CFD is commonly used, and I might even be able to help you out with some contractors for that, actually.
Great, because we're still struggling with it. We're learning,
Yep. It's involved. There's no doubt about it. Let's talk about, didn't at one point you guys build GT40s?
No, we never did. We had a lawsuit with Ford, and the resolution of the lawsuit was that we were free from any trade dress claims. So I bought a GT40. There was a company in South Africa called CAV. I bought one They were one of the better replicas out there. We kind of reverse engineered it, and we decided that it was really the reason why the GT40, everybody loves it and no one drives it, is a very bad car to drive. You're sitting inboard of two gas tanks, not a great idea. Your pedals are center line in the car. When I drove it, if I had a passenger that stretched out their foot, they'd hit my gas. So there were a lot of issues with the car. Visibility was another one. It's one of those, an off-color comment would be, marrying a stripper is a challenge. It might seem like a good idea, probably doesn't work out. Sorry to be so off-color, but the GT40 is that sexy, probably the most beautiful car ever made.
Agreed.
And really not a very drivable car. And so we went to the GTM, and the last remnant of the GT40 is the windshield. Our GTM has a GT40 windshield.
I thought at one point you built one GT40.
No. We built a GTM prototype, and we went through solid modeling, started on the GTM, and it was a miserable failure. We hired our master shaper as a result, and John shaped our GTM design really well, and it came out beautiful. It went through a couple of iterations, but we never have produced a GT40.
Okay. Your lawsuit with Ford over the Cobra.
Right.
How and when did that come about?
It was one of those accidents, and if you look at the 30,000-foot view, it's really easy. Shelby sued Ford in '92, saying you abandoned the word Cobra and the car. And it was, if you want to keep a trademark, or in this case, a trade dress, a shape or something, you have to do four things. You have to keep making it, right? Don't abandon it. You have to defend against infringers. If someone makes a copy of your car, there were thousands of Cobra replicas out there.
Yep.
You can't allow that to happen. You can't allow people to rip off your product. That's defense against infringers. You also have to have a thing called secondary meaning. Secondary meaning is when someone looks at the Cobra, they know that was made by Carroll Shelby in Venice, California. There were so many replicas out there that when someone said Cobra, they meant that in a generic sense. And the last one was functionality. If you look at the original Cobra, it was an AC motor car. And the changes that were made to the car were for racing. Fender flares, hood scoop, roll bar, rear side exhaust for a big engine. All of those things were things that you would have to do to a Cobra, to an AC car if you were going to race it. So none of those were trade dress capable. So Shelby lost on all four claims, but it didn't matter. He sued Ford and he won. Ford could not show, didn't need a trial, couldn't show that the word Cobra had not been abandoned. Well, since they couldn't show it, they were summary judgment, Cobra abandoned. But then Ford appealed and said, how about we make you an exclusive licensee? We'll give you a whole bunch of money. And as soon as he had that, he went and sued us over the word Cobra. Now, there's a term called judicial estoppel. You're not allowed to argue both sides of an argument. You can't say the Cobra is not a valid mark in sworn testimony, and then 4 years later, sue Factor 5 say it is a valid mark. So those arguments were never going to ever work in court. And we won, and we settled because Ford said, look, don't use the word Cobra, and you can make any shape you want. Sounds good to me. And so I gave our discovery to the rest of the industry. I said, if anybody gets sued, they can use it. Superformance used all of our discovery and prevailed when Shelby sued them. But the nice thing is we never countersued. We never said a bad word about Shelby. We kept it positive. We understood that we were standing on the shoulders of a lot of people. And so we had to do what we had to do legally to protect our business. And what Factory 5 has done, which I will crow about, is that we secured forever the shape of the Cobra is public domain. It's been adjudicated 3 times, and it was picked up by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office because it was such a fascinating case. And they went through the whole thing, and because of functionality, because of secondary meaning, because of defense against infringers, and because of abandonment, all 4 standards had not been met. And so the shape of the Cobra and Daytona Coupe are public domain, that's my gift.
Now, I want to ask 2 questions to follow up on that. Number one, if you're willing, what did that lawsuit cost you?
Well, it was $1.3 million, and we had an insurance company that covered $1 million of it. So it cost us $300,000. And then the terms of the settlement with Ford were very favorable. I'm not allowed to discuss the terms of the settlement, but I was persuaded not to fight in court over something. And frankly, I think Ford put forth a very good effort to do what's called rehabilitating a mark. And so they maybe they were late to the party, but they did it in good faith, and they weren't vindictive with us. And now we're one of the top 4 distributors in the country. Our cars have been in their catalogs. Talk about a family feud that came right. And Shelby passed away, God rest his soul. And I think that I will write a book on this, on the Cobra Wars, but from the historical context of like the origins of the word Cobra, which were copper braised Cobra, came from the Mighty Tin engine and the old Crosley Hotshot. So if you look at that snake badge, you know, Shelby didn't just have a dream. It came from Crosley, and Crosley was out of business, so he could use it.
Do you know if Shelby was flattered and impressed with Factory 5's what would have been the Mark II at that point?
Between the Mark I and Mark II, I think we were filed in '99. So we're working on Mark II. It didn't matter. We were selling a lot of Cobras at the time, and so we were the target. And I don't think he was flattered as much as, you know, I was really, and I've been so lucky in this business. Talk about the opposite side of regrets. I've been able to meet really great. I met, you know, Dan Gurney in his shop, and I shook hands with Phil Remington, who was really the reason why Shelby won, and one of the many reasons, but a great, great guy. And Dan Gurney is someone who I held in such ridiculously high esteem, such a great guy. And I asked Dan about Carroll because we were going through the lawsuit, and he said, Dave, he goes, I don't deal with Carroll. He's very litigious, and that's true. Everybody knows that about Shelby. I'm not saying anything bad about him, and I never do bad things about people. But he said to me, he gave me great advice. He goes, remember, Dave, he goes, Carroll's a race car driver. He's not a businessman. Carroll wants to win a race, and you don't co-win. In business, there's win-win. There is no win-win in racing, all right?
That's right.
Carroll's entire business ethos was win and destroy the other person. So I don't think there was ever a chance to collaborate with Shelby, unless it was under duress, and that's not me. That's not me.
Ford and Factory 5 are, for lack of a better term, husband and wife, if you will, right?
They're a great partner of ours. We're a huge partner of them, but it's all Blue Oval fans. Look at our customers.
Right.
It's a commingled group.
My point is, Dave, is that Ford looked at Factory 5 as a large asset to them.
I think that when Carroll sued Factory 5, it was over the word Cobra, but he was very smart that he slipped in claims on the body shape. Ford was, to be honest, Ford was a reluctant partner in that lawsuit. They wanted nothing to do with it. It was a family feud. Sure. So letting it go to resolution and settling it was a logical path because nobody really wanted to fight other than Shelby. And Shelby got an agreement, a settlement that was favorable to him, but everybody else got to kiss and make up. And so, you know, our cars have been in their catalog ever since. And actually, during the lawsuit, our cars were actually in their car featured. So the point is, our customers are huge Ford fans. They're Ford Story fans. They're Shelby fans. There was no dissent in any of the community other than Shelby litigating. And I think the way to understand Shelby is he would sue his best friends. That was just who he was. And you know, he said something to my brother. He put his hand around my brother's shoulder because I was the hothead. And he said, tell your brother it's just business. And he had this amazing, affable way of disarming you. And you'd be like, oh, it's just business. No, it's not just business. He's trying to destroy your company. But he was a genius, and he was a PR master. And even though I knew the truth of a lot of the stories, I prefer to hear his story better. He's a better storyteller. And I knew the truth, and I'm believing him, you know? So all's well that ends well is the right way to say it.
Absolutely. Now, did you ever get acknowledged by your competitors that also make a Cobra style car?
That was the number one concern when we made the resolution. There were a lot of Cobra. I know the Weaver brothers from Unique Automotive were there. Phil Gaudet, a decent gentleman from ERA. They were waiting on the resolution. And when we made our agreement, they were like, oh, we knew you'd sell out. You abandoned us, right? Now, to be fair, nobody had paid any bills other than me. So it wasn't a sellout. But what I did was really unconventional. And I think I kind of regretted it later, is I met with those guys the next morning. We were up to about midnight doing the resolution. I met with all of my competitors who were paying attention to the lawsuit. And I said, here's my lawyer's card. Here's $300,000 worth of consumer surveys by Jacoby out of New York, the best consumer survey, which proves that the shape of the car is public domain and that the name was never defined. Here's my evidence, $1.3 million. I said, it's all yours. So if Shelby sues anybody, you can use it. And Shelby did sue Superformance, and Superformance used that data and prevailed in court. Shelby appealed and said, I'll make you an exclusive of Shelby. And they were happy to take that. I think that was a bad deal that they took because they're still paying royalties on their cars forever.
Really?
That was the deal they made. So they have to pay Shelby American royalties on a design that's public domain. But they thought, in their best interest, they thought it would be a feather in their cap to be the exclusive licensee of Shelby. And technically they are. I'm not, but they used my evidence to get that exclusive licensee. So that it was a lesson in business. Maybe not always be the most affable.
Do you regret that you don't have the exclusivity?
No way.
No.
No. If you look at the story of Shelby in the 60s, it is the exclusive purview of my age and older. If you ask a 35-year-old kid, what's that? And it's a Cobra driving down the street, he'll say it's a Factory 5. We built 12,000 of them. You know, we are the largest manufacturer. And you know what? At that time, what was I fighting over? I was fighting over the right to use someone else's name and tell someone else's story. Well,
Right.
guess what I've done since 2000? I've been telling Factory 5 story. And we built this amazing, iconic American motorsports company. So lesson learned, tell your own story. And by the way, with all due respect, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, but we are in our own right, building our own stories on that. And if you look at the Cobra specifically, because we have other models, the Cobra has been a bastard child from the very beginning. AC built it, Ford sold it, Shelby put the engines in it. Who was the manufacturer of record? It was always very fudgy. It was one of those, in today's world, there would have to be a manufacturer. But so the Cobras raced primarily, they were sales failures, and then came Arnst, Steve Arnst, and the Arnst replicas in the late 70s. And all these replica companies, there's really, it's inseparable, the story of the Cobra from the story of replicas, who's told it, who's succeeded.
Right.
It's basically one big story of collaboration. And the reason why our company's been so good is our company is completely dependent on collaboration. I don't build cars. So every Factory 5 out there was built by somebody else, not me. I relied, I like to say my reputation rides shotgun on that guy's build. So our company is carrying on the collaborative nature and spirit of that original car. And that's where, Joe philosophy degree really matters, is seeing those connections and understanding that my company has to do everything it can to build and collaborate with our customers. It's not sell it off the showroom floor. There you go. We live with these cars.
You mentioned 12,000 Cobras.
Yes, 12,000 chassis. I think we just passed 10,000 on the Cobra.
Okay. 10,000 chassis. Okay, so 12,000 chassis total for Factory 5, 10,000 Cobras, which obviously makes it the number one selling vehicle of factory5.com, correct?
Yes, yes.
What is the product life cycle for the Mark IV?
That's interesting because normally you'd have a trajectory. You'd have early adopters, a peak, and a decline. The Cobra has been strong ever since. Now, it's not our best selling. It's one of. Our new Daytona Coupe, our Gen 3, and our hot rod and hot rod truck, all those are kind of tied with the Cobra. So the Cobra is at a downstroke, but the downstroke is still such a huge part of the industry. And I also think that the Cobra is kind of, when we launched in 95, people looked at it and said, a Mustang engine in a 427? That's blasphemy. That's not even a Cobra. 3 years later, we were 50% or more of the market. So we defined a new genre of Cobra replica. Well, now take that. That was just an engine and running gear. Now take that to the extreme. Kids building Cobras today are using LS engines. They're putting flame jobs on them. It is a hot rod of a new generation. If I look at a 33 Ford, there's no rules. Small block Chevy, modular motor, you put whatever you want in it, you put whatever wheels on. It's a true custom. It's a true hot rod. Well, the Cobra used to be a replica. The Cobra is growing up. And if you look at that trajectory and that life cycle, it's becoming more of a custom to the younger generation. So it's no longer, and there's a lot of guys that are like, I wouldn't put 19-inch wheels on a Cobra. I want 15s. And yeah, well, drive a set of bias ply 15s and compare them to a set of 18-inch, brand new Toyo R88s. It's not even night and day. You're going to want them. So it's evolving, but it hasn't trailed off completely.
What does the Factory 5 demographic look like?
It used to be boomers, and the boomers have driven the economy for so long. But I'm a numbers guy, and behind the cheerleading, I always have to look at numbers because I got to keep the ship off the rocks, right? We got 40 employees plus here. We got, about $14 million a year in sales. We build about 500 cars, kits that you have to build. So looking down the road, holy cow, I can't even remember what your question was. I was going to go a whole other direction. So what was that?
The demographic of Factory 5.
So looking down the road, I've got to figure out how am I going to sell and what am I going to sell as these populations age. If you look at Tri-5 Chevys and you look at auction, I look at auction prices. Man, 15 years ago, those were $100,000 cars. Now they're $40,000 cars. And that's with chassis, everything. You look at the hot rods and Cobras, we're in the muscle car. You look at Mustangs now, Novas, they're getting all the money. Dodge Hemi, right? I think as the Cobra ages, as it changes, more and more young kids are doing it. I'd say 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it was 80% boomers. Now it's 60-40, meaning 40% boomers and 60%, under 50. And the funniest thing is I still sell cars to kids who said, I got your brochure when I was 14. And the kid grew up and now he's 35 years old.
Right.
We're restoring factory five. So yeah, the demographic definitely shifted, maybe even more powerfully than if you follow auctions. The muscle cars are kind of dominating the auctions. I think our demographic is a custom car builder. It attracts younger guys.
And that's great. And are most of your builders drivers or showers? Meaning, do they actually drive them? Because that, as a builder, I hope they do drive them. And as a from a manufacturer side, you want them to be seen and you want them to be driven, absolutely not trailer queens and certainly not garage queens.
I would say that, remember, our company is so firmly set on performance and chassis and engineering that the normal Pareto, where you have 80% of the bulge would be in the middle and 10% on either end. Right now, if you look at our distribution, I'll bet you 5% or less actually compete and race. So they would be the kind of the alphas of the group. Right. And a good 85% of people are building them and driving them and using them. A replica used to be a garage trailer, a garage queen, or trailer queen where you'd see 1,000 miles after 5 years. You got customers with a tremendous amount of miles in the cars that use their cars, and that's the main bolus of the population. And then the other end, there are some legitimate show cars out there, and whether they get driven 500 or 1,000 miles a year, they are 100-point show cars. Much lower than I think most replica companies were. They were more show cars. I think ours are engineered to be driven, so they get driven more. But I'd split it up that way. It's been pretty consistent.
And what do you do primarily to make your cars more drivable?
I kind of envy the big three because they make a car and they don't have to engineer it to be made. Now they have to be assembled on assembly line, but that's different. I can anticipate, all the different skill sets of people, different tools, environments. So it's quite a challenge. But at the end of the day, the most important job of the car, if you remember kit cars, they looked great, they drove like crap, and when you're done building them, you spent twice the money to build them, and they weren't worth half the money you had into them. Factory fives, going back to philosophy. So how do the cars drive and how do we engineer them to drive well? It has to go back to the philosophy of the company. We build stories, we build value, we build performance, we build usability. Everything we do has to build. If the car that I build with a customer is worth less than the money has into it, I didn't build value. If it doesn't perform, if it's a pretty postcard but it doesn't drive, I've driven a lot of old cars and we forget how bad these cars were. A Factory 5 is a good, modern, high-performance car. Every person who's ever driven one from the news and media has always said, oh my God, this is so much better than most street cars because we have this huge advantage of weight and a huge advantage of torsion rigidity on the chassis because we can make a chassis in a way that Ford and GM can't. Tube steel, it's too expensive for them. So yeah, we engineer that in from the beginning, and that's Jim in engineering. It started on the track and it ends on the street.
If you can, Dave, and I know this is a very strange question for the listener that's listening and or watching this that has never heard of Factory 5, has never seen a Factory 5, but they own, insert whatever car, high performance driving car they have, sports car.
Right.
If you can, give them an idea of what are a Cobra GTM would correlate to that they can go buy off the showroom floor.
No can do.
In rough terms, I think it's important that people understand that a modern car, a modern street car, is very refined. So the chance of squeaks, rattles, all of that stuff, I wish people could really, truly understand how much engineering and time gets put into stuff like that, right? It's unfathomable.
Your question of parallel would be a high-performance sports car. It's not a car that you're going to use every day. It's your quote-unquote other car. So, you have a pickup truck or a Honda Civic or a car that you commute in or, those are functional vehicles that do a job. They're appliances. They're very good appliances. They're incredibly well engineered. But Factory 5 is a car you're building yourself. So you kind of have pros and cons. You've got pros of incredible performance ability because super light. You don't have all the electronics of electronic seat bolsters and everything else. A modern day car harness weighs 200 pounds of wiring, right? So you have advantages over production cars in terms of weight and torsional rigidity, suspension, high performance parts. But on the other side, it has to be built by a person at home. So, if a person doesn't do a good job building it, you're going to get rattles and squeaks. You're going to get things that aren't finished right. A paint job that looks like someone ruined their very best broom, So yeah, I'd say the best analogy is a high performance sports car. But where I really like our cars is that as time has gone by, we are more and more removed from being able to work on something. I mean, if this iPhone or this iPad that I'm on, if it breaks, I'm going to get a new one. I'm not going to fix it. Everything, because manufacturing has gotten so good that it's less expensive to replace it with new than it is to actually fix it. We grew up in a culture where we fixed everything. And so building a Factory 5 gives you a chance to reach back in time and still get your hands dirty and build something. And it is an intelligence test. Beyond the car and beyond the value of the car and all the talk about performance and all that, it's also a crossword puzzle, right? It's a Sudoku. It's a puzzle. It's an intelligence test. How are you going to put this thing together with your own creative ideas? There's not a single Factory 5 that's the same out there. And each one is a reflection of the intelligence and the creativity and the craftsmanship of that builder. So it's hard to make a parallel to a car out there, but there have been some oddball cars like TVRs, which are kind of like that. They're niche type cars. But I'll tell you what, as far as cars have come, if you compare a Factory 5 today to anything made in the 60s, we are so far superior. You drive an old K-Code Mustang, not a great driving car. You run out here with that top loader, you got manual steering, you hit bumps, where's the air conditioning? Crank windows. People are spoiled by how good cars are today.
Of the questions that you always get the most, what are your top questions that people will ask you?
It's the same old questions over and over. How hard is it? How difficult is it to build, right? And the truth is, it's a car guy's project. It's not for everybody. This is not a mainstream project. This is for that Tim Taylor with the hot rod in his garage, right? And how does it perform? So to answer those questions, we have a build school that people can go and actually build the car in 3 days and kind of see how hard it is to build. A very few number of people take the build school and say, wow, it's too hard. I shouldn't be doing it. Good for them. Most people see it and learn from the build school and then order a kit. And then for a while, we had 3 cars at the Bondurant school that people actually drive on the track. And that sold a ton of cars because people had no idea how good the cars are. And then Bondurant was taken over by GM at the time, and GM wasn't real crazy about Cobras. So those are the 2 cars. How does it drive? And remember, we're not a car dealership, so I'll do test drives personally, but we're not a company that does test drives that gives people loaner cars and all that. It's just too custom. We are so in the lunatic fringe of guys who build their own cars.
Does the cost question come up often?
It does. It does. Most of these guys who are doing it, think about this. This is the only product that you can buy that doesn't have a financing arm connected to it. I mean, I can go out and buy a couch at a furniture store and finance $699, right?
Right.
I have a $20,000 kit from Factory 5, and there's no financing. So by default, the people who are getting into this are fairly resourceful. They either have a home equity line or they have the money saved up. So believe it or not, the cost isn't usually one of the most common questions. We put our prices in our brochures, and these guys are figuring out this puzzle. Where am I going to build it? How hard is it to build? How many hours? What running gear I need? What paint and bodywork supplies do I need? My expertise in bodywork is really one of the most important. A lot of people outsource that, but these are questions, and I'm glad you're asking this because these are questions that if you go into a car dealership, hey, red car drives great, we can finance you, and you're gone in 30 minutes. You don't know what happened. You're driving down the car and right? This is not an emotional decision. Right. To build a Factory 5 is a cerebral decision, and it takes a long time planning and late nights at the kitchen table talking. And so I kind of like our customers are already, they don't need a sales pitch. I don't have any salespeople, and I sell 10 cars a week for 25 years. So it's a testament to the cerebral nature of the project.
Are you hands-on in the sales process?
Not anymore. I'm not hands-on in anything anymore. I'm a cheerleader. We really have had some big supply chain challenges this year because of the global pandemic that drove projects at home. So I've had to take an active hand in materials and working with suppliers. And we ran out of Coney shocks, and I called Jim at Coney, and I said, Jim, I called Lee. Lee's one of their senior VPs. I said, I need a favor here, and they got involved and got us parts. So my relationship and building relationships as part of our company. And so I've had to get my hands dirty in terms of supplier relationships this year. But most of my time this year has been, we can't go to shows and events. We can't go out to races. We can't sell. So all of that money that we would have spent, $600,000-$700,000 in traveling and shows and events, I turned inwards. So we did vertical integration. We brought laser cutting for tube steel in-house, tube steel bending, CNC bending. I bought a 6-axis mill for the molding building. Oh, wait, I built a whole molding building next door. So we invested about $3.5 million, all internal operational upgrades this year, because we didn't have those expenses and we didn't have those draws away from the company. So that's a way of kind of making lemonade out of lemons.
Do you believe that that'll create better products for the end user?
It will, no doubt. I mean, the trimming is more accurate, the welding is more accurate, the tube steel cutting with a laser is just better than a bandsaw. So tolerances are tighter, no doubt about it. But that was one of the reasons we did it. But the real reason was, think about, you asked about turnover. And so getting into the nuts and bolts of the business that nobody else does, and I like the cerebral aspect of your questions. I've got legacy costs, right, that are increasing. My guys are making, Jesper and Jim make a lot more money, we were talking about them, than they did when they got out of Rensselaer Polytech 25 years ago. Right. So where am I going to do that? I can't raise my prices. We're in a segment that's very competitive and there's not a lot of margin. So bringing more processes in-house and having control of those processes like laser tube steel cutting, that's a huge margin that comes inside. So it offsets those legacy costs, increases quality, makes our design more flexible, because with a tube steel laser, you can put notches and other fixtures in the tube so the part becomes a fixture. So the answer to your question is, I have a lot to do with the business, but I don't have to do a lot.
You make it sound simple when you say it that way, which we all know.
A lot of bricks in the wall, but they're all bricks.
All right, fair enough. Do you tell the typical person that calls and inquires about a kit, what do you usually tell them in terms of cost to build a Mark IV Cobra?
Well, you know, we talk about cost to build in terms of the finished cost. And of course, one of those legacy cost offsets are, you want to try to capture more of the cost of the car. So if we have a related company that's saying, I'm plugging in because my battery's running out.
Okay.
If we have if we can capture more of the completed vehicle cost, right? Well, then what we can do is we can make more money. Well, if you look at prices, we always talk to customers in terms of cost to complete the car. So when we talk about cost, we're talking about the finished cost of the kit. The kit's right. 22 grand. The average cost is about 40 to 45 grand for a Cobra, different for the different models.
Yep. Dave, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish I would have, or that you would like to tell us?
One of the things I would cover is, one of the success is respect for labor. And when you think about, you know, the 2008, 2009 recession, and one of the reasons why my brother and I kind of fell apart is, I think layoffs start at the top. You know, what did my welders do wrong in 2008 and 2009? The answer is nothing. And corporate America always starts at the bottom. And the guy who does a great job is laid off. Philosophically, that's so corrupt, because my job is to keep us off the rocks 5 years from now. If I do that, I get the big bucks, right? What happens if I don't do that? I didn't do that in 2008 and 2009. We almost went out of business. Luckily, we had a new hot rod that came out. And when my Cobra sales tanked with the Daytona Coupe, our hot rod came up. But to close on that, when you spend a day doing someone else's job, and this is, I'll try to truncate this because it's such a good story. Every intern that has started at Factory 5, I start them out in molding, cutting up old molds in the summertime, wearing Tyvek with a respirator. It's 90 degrees outside. And those guys work for a week, and I don't tell them what I'm doing, and it's a test. And some of them start complaining right off the bat. I got no use for them, okay? Charlie worked, one of my interns, smart kid. At the end of the week, he comes in covered with sweat, a week of cutting up old molds. I mean, these are 1.5 inch, 2 inch thick fiberglass steel reinforced molds. To cut them up once they go bad with a Sawzall, it's not an easy job. At the end of the week, he came in the office and he pulls his Tyvek off, covered with sweat. And I said, "How's it going, Charlie?" He goes, it was a tough week. And I said, "Well, you just spent a week, you know, working with your back." I said, "Are you ready to work with your brain?" And he goes, "I'd really like to work with my brain, sir." Point is, he worked all summer and he never went in that molding area or welding without respect. So an engineer that's designing a tool for a journeyman or craftsman to use, if he's been a week in that guy's shoes, he understands how hard that job is. And now he engineers that tool to be easier to use. At Factory 5, respect for everyone's job is so integral to us. And it also helps us when we're building our own cars to respect what our customers have to go through. This is my most important degree was philosophy and understanding the why behind what we do, not just what we do and how we do it, but the why. That we didn't really cover that, but that was part of a TED talk that I saw. And when I saw it, my head exploded. It was like, that's Factory 5.
You can feel free to explain that.
We're just riffing. Well, what do? We build kit cars, right? Build yourself cars. How do we do it? We use CNC technology. We talked about a motivated, smart, talented staff. We collaborate with our customers.
Right.
Why do we do it? Some business owners, not myself, think that it's to make money. The money is a byproduct of a job well done. It's not. My whole life I've loved building things. I love building relationships with you, with the press, with our suppliers. Look what happened when times were tough. I called Coney and I talked to Lee. I said, Lee, I need a solid. And he was there for me. 20 years of working together, right? I like to build things. The why behind Factory 5 is building our careers. We have to make money. We can't take care of our customers if we don't run a lucrative business. I want to build people's careers, Jesper and Jim and the rest of our guys here. And when I lose a guy, it's reluctant, but he's building his career and I wish him all the luck. So Factory 5, people think we build cars or build it yourself cars. We build everything. And the only things I don't like is when we tear people down or we tear things down, or, where there's destructive in the process. Love multiplies and hate divides. And that's all core philosophy. So that's Factory 5, man. It's a great company. And it really, I'm talking about my own kids. So if people out there have kids, their kids are amazing. They're perfect, right? Well, the rest of the world sees them as zit-faced little kids, right? But my company and my kids are beautiful and they're remarkable. And when people come to visit Factory 5, they really do walk away saying, God, something different about that company. And it's not something different. It's everything different. And if you have a chance to write a Jerry Maguire, it was just a mission statement turned into a company. That's what has happened at Factory 5. So when you asked about regrets, I got none. We were so lucky.
Will your kids take over the company at some point?
No way.
What will happen?
I don't know. I mean, I think if our kids have, Nicole and Madison, Jenny, and Adam was here Saturday,
Right.
and he was here Friday. Nate needed help in packaging. He said, hey, can you have Adam come in? He's doing school at home. So yeah, the kids have learned from Factory 5. They've interned here, but personal philosophy, I don't want to rob my kids their opportunity to run their own lives. I don't want them taking my dream and having to, first generation makes it, second generation keeps it, the third generation loses it. No, I'd rather them find their passion. If their passion is Factory 5, I certainly want them to work here, but this isn't a family business. This is a successful business, and Jim and Jesper and Sandra and Nate and the rest of the crew here have every bit of much right to work here and succeed here as my family members. So I'm not going to go on that path.
Wonderful. Such a great message. It's really wonderful to hear about Factory 5. For those that are interested, please go visit factory5.com and reach out to Dave if you have any questions. Thank you so much for your time, Dave.
You're welcome. It was a lot of fun. Thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. Find us on YouTube and Facebook at the Intellectual People Podcast and online at theintellectualpeoplepodcast.com. Check back for exciting new episodes.